Well, this is great. Thanks for coming. My name is Dick Whitney. I was born in Southbridge and worked at American Optical, never left actually, since 1974. I represent the Optical Heritage Museum and Zeiss, my company, who's the sponsor of the museum. You are standing in the last Green Valley, the last stretch of dark night between Boston and Washington, made up of 77% forest and farmland with unique natural, cultural, and historic resources like this one. This area has been named the National Heritage Corridor, like the National Park, but much more to offer. Last Green Valley is a nonprofit member supported by Stewart of 35 Town Region and brings you October each year. I also wanted to introduce Art Salsi, who's a valuable member, good friend, valuable member of, volunteer for the Optical Heritage Museum, and he knows a lot of the history as well of this place, having worked there for how long?
50 years.
50 years? So he's a baby in it. But so he and I said, I've only had 43 years here, so I'm a youngster. So we will be walking through. I've arranged for the hotel to open that front door. It's a very historic front door. In fact, I got to tell you a story. I think one of the highlights of my career happened 3 weeks ago, because I'm a member of, I chair the ANSI Eyeglass Committee for the U.S., but there is what called ISO International Standards that we also participate in. When we were in Sydney last October, they said, where do we meet next? And they said, let's go to Southbridge. So they came to Southbridge, and they're going to Berlin the next meeting, so that gives you a flavor. We had 31 experts from 10 countries, 6 experts from mainland China, Australia, Japan, Belgium, Israel, Canada, France, Germany. They all came here, posed here where you are, posed there, stayed at the hotel, and were absolutely blown away. So, and I had a guy from the UK say, I expected to come to this hole-in-the-wall place, and I couldn't have been more wrong on how great Southbridge is. So, you know, I hear all the time how great Southbridge is, and this whole region is wonderful. So I just have to promote it, and they were blown away by the hotel, which was super busy, by the way. So it's good to see that happen. So I'll try and give my perspective, but Art, anytime, jump in. So this building, first of all, this statue, because of the Swyaki sisters who were teachers in town, and many other, I was involved, but Donna Silverberg and Gabe McCarthy and many others were involved in getting this here. It was a tribute to American Optical and its people. So what we're going to walk through today is I'm going to call it the AO Complex, because that's what it is. And many important inventions happened here, but at its peak, there were 5,500 people working here, 13,000 around the world. Now, so I don't forget, before I go on to the history and more about the complex, that stone over there, the museum and the IEEE Society donated that stone as a recognition of what was invented right here. And you'll learn more about this if you come to the museum, but the IEEE Engineering Society said, invented there was one of the top 100 inventions of all time, like the light bulb. In 1964, Elias Schnitzer worked and developed on fiber optics along with Will Hicks. The fiber optics started in Southbridge because of the CIA, but the invention there allows you to talk on your cell phones today. It's the fiber optic amplifier, so any fiber optic signal is amplified by that invention. So that stone, even though it's not very noticeable, is very important. So we're going to be walking through here. This building was built in 1901. 1902 was the clock tower. They built on either side before they built the center. AO was founded on the corner of Main and Central Street in 1833. The building where Styles is now, that location was a jewelry shop, and on the second floor they made silver spectacles and started tinkering. So before too much talking, do you have anything in particular you want to say? This was torn down, as you know, and reopened in 2002, but basically it was only the center building and the very front wall was retained. Everything else was knocked down. It was an $80 million project. 3 presidents were involved in it, long story. But it's really great that they were able to save the appearance of the building. The museum, by the way, was located in one room right there, right on the right as you walk in the front door. So we're going to be careful crossing the street, but please be careful. But once we do, we're going to walk through there, down and outside the hotel, the Southbridge Hotel and Conference Center. If you've never been, go back. There's a great pub there, but there's an outdoor dining, but also an indoor swimming pool, and it's a great facility. This building was originally a wooden building, and they moved here. The original factory was just around the corner where the gas station is, between 1839 and 1865, something like that. And then it moved to this complex, and this was built in 1901, 02. Now, one curious thing that I still don't know the answer to is this is not the original stairway. The original pictures in 1901 show 2 stairs, one going this way, one going this way. And I have never found out why such a gorgeous reconstruction, because the other stairs were just as beautiful. But now we have these stairs, and I've never found out record why, except maybe they were trying to do something here, and it's unexplained. But this is when we reopened the hotel in 2002. I threw the first event here. We had 500 people from around the world come, and we rededicated these plaques. So one of them here is the people of Southbridge presented on the 100th anniversary. Tribute to George Wells, which you'd learn more about. I can talk about at the museum. And the clock tower originally. So these 3 are dedicated. So since we've begin to move, I'm going to walk you down the stairwell, and you'll be in the hotel lobby. There are 202 rooms here, a huge conference room area. Just watch your step. You have a wonderful conference center down that way, and a ballroom, and world-class meeting facilities. You have a pool, you have an outdoor dining area, which I say come back. You can have pub sandwiches or meals or drinks, so you got to come back. And we're going to be walking outside. But I wanted to point out one thing. First of all, I just had them, Steve, the manager, put this up with my assistants. In 1955, where you were standing, August 19th, 2 dams broke in Southbridge, one of them in Charlton, and that was the flood height, 1955. It was also 38, the hurricane, and 2 in 1936 were about that level. But I think that's very dramatic. Panda Garden was under 15 feet of water. Buildings in the road. So if you come to the museum, I'll show you a short video clip, but you can find it on YouTube. And the cable TV has done several of the broadcasts also. But I wanted to point that out. So if you come along. Where you're standing, we had a whole complex that was torn down. And that flood level you see used to be in chalk markers, well actually painted markers, over on the corner here. I don't know if I dare, I guess we can walk through here. It's all right to walk on the grass. We're gonna head this way. But as you can see, I think it's a wonderful facility, and They're doing a lot of promotion now. There was a period of time where the government basically had rooms locked in and you couldn't go there. So early on it was less utilized by the public than it is now.
I'm understanding right. What's the Glass Museum now at Southbridge Village was the original shop?
The glass house at the village was the original replica of the factory. And I have a model at the museum. And Ruth Wells, who founded the museum with John Young, founded Old Southbridge Village with Albert Wells. So the Wells family still is influencing everything today. Business, certainly the Southbridge wouldn't be Southbridge without the village. And it was all American Optical. American Optical, actually, the Wells building where Metro Bistro and Subway is, that was Old Southbridge Village. That's where the village started. They decided later to do a living village when they went to Sweden and saw a living example museum, so that's what happened. Anyway, this is Building 5. They renumbered the buildings, good 10 years ago. But that was the original, when I remember it, print shop. That's where they printed all the magazines, brochures, newspapers, everything. That was it. Right now we have the college there and the employment center. So that building was restored maybe 10 years ago. By the way, the road before 2002 used to be on this side, and they diverted the whole road. That wall was integral to, even though it wouldn't prevent a flood, the government almost didn't come here because of concerns of the flood, but of course Westville Dam, Buffertonville Dam, those were all built because of American Optical. It would have, and lobbying of the region, because they would have left if they had not built the dams. But that wall convinced them that there was a little retaining wall for the river. By the way, this is the complex we're going to be walking through. And it's, I forgot how many acres, 45, something like that. But that building that you see there, I have a map that shows carpenter shop at that time, 1906, 1912. There were two other buildings over there. And each wing that was later torn down here was built separately. They kept building small additions of buildings. But this is the complex we're going to be walking through. Can't believe this weather, though. So I mentioned shot fiber optic. Well, I didn't mention shot, but fiber optics started in Southbridge because of the CIA. The CIA hired a man named Will Hicks to come to Southbridge in 1952, I believe it was. And they said it was for some other reason than it really was. What they wanted to do is code and decode messages. So really, Southbridge became the birthplace of fiber optics because of the CIA. And they hired him as a frontman at AO. Why I mention that is the AO fiber optics is still here under SHOT. SHOT fiber optics was the AO fiber optics. So as I said, when I first started here, there were 5,500 people here, and as it began to downsize, it was rather discouraging to see it leave, but we still do have some businesses. There were two guard shacks, and the reason for that was, on either entrance, because we had many military contracts, and so the guards would sign you in and out. Now, Will Hicks, for one, resented that, so much so that I think that's one reason he left. He left and founded his own company. Okay, in 1955, as I said, the tidal wave, Prindle Lake Dam broke. The tidal wave came down Worcester Street, 10 feet tall by 100 feet wide. Now, can you imagine? Nobody in Southbridge gets killed with a tidal wave coming into town. Buildings were washed into the middle of the road. It was really quite something. But that retaining wall, one of my bosses at AO, everyone was given a job, and his job was to build that retaining wall. My father's job was to be sure the drinking water was good and he advised Clorox be put in water, but the problem is there was a misprint and they printed 4 times the amount, so there was a run on Clorox at the First National. This building right here that now has Schott names on it, and I think Schott, at one point, I'm not sure if the newspaper still also prints there, but in any case, that was the warehouse. And that was built in 1949, something in that 50, somewhere in that time frame. So I remember, I worked in most all of these buildings in one way or another. Now, AO was so big, as I said, 13,000 around the world, that they ran out of space here. We had a Putnam plant. We made our frames in Frederick, Maryland from the 50s to 1982, 83. Brattleboro, Vermont, Keene, New Hampshire were manufacturing sites. And we're going to be seeing a tunnel in a minute, but we even manufactured in the tunnel because there was no room. During the Depression, there never was a full depression in Southbridge because we employed many. All right.
Yes.
We're coming up to a building that Art knows much more about, Art Salsi, but the Aero building, this building was built during World War II, and I always thought it opened during the war. The government paid to have it built, but Art discovered really that it didn't open until what, 1947?
1947.
Okay.
This building was built actually by the U.S. government and the U.S. Air Force. It was intended to be a warehouse for them because AO was supporting the war effort during World War II. During the war, you couldn't get any steel or a lot of building materials because that was all going towards the war effort. But being up here in the Northeast, we have a lot of lumber, a lot of timber. So this building here is all made with timbers on the inside. A lot of braces, a lot of structural integrity. And you can see there's bays that go up and down. And that was intended to be where the warehouse portion was going to be. They were going to put some high towers in. Well, fortunately the war ended, but the building was never completed. At the end, the government told AO that since you helped us out during the war, you can take this building. So AO finished off the building, and back then this would have been called a frame plant. American Optical back then was very vertically integrated. Whatever started on one end of the building came out as a finished product on the other end. No matter what building you look at within the complex, this building made frames. Originally it made metal frames and plastic frames. Finally, the plastic frames went out probably around the mid-1950s. That moved down to Frederick, Maryland. But all the other buildings in here all did vertically integrated products. The print shop that we went by, anything that needed to be printed for American Optical started in that building and it came out as a finished product. As we go around the corner, you're going to see some lens buildings, and that's the same thing with those lens buildings. One made the blanks, one did the rough polishing, one building did the final polishing, one building did all the edging. So and that's how American Optical, operated.
I learn something every time you talk. And notice there's a conveyor that goes between the warehouse and the frame plant. Most every building also had conveyor systems.
A lot of conveyor systems. That, in the heyday of American Optical, when they were building a lot of metal products, we used to make a lot of sunglasses for the military, the FT58 glasses. It was very secure back then. So the finished product, once it was inspected and accepted, went up that conveyor belt right into stocking to the back.
So, what did the American Optical make during the war?
Well,
they made lenses, obviously, and they also made goggles for pilots, big wraparound goggles.
Putnam was making the goggles that were polarized that you'd flip among other things. They were making safety products, and that was used at the end of the war to view the atomic bomb. It was, we have, not directly, but the pilot would dial it in and drop the bomb.
So did they do other optics for the military?
Oh
Or
yes.
just straight glasses?
We did the Sidewinder missile, and did night vision scopes. Not all World War
That's
II,
after World War II.
Yeah.
but World War II we were doing instruments, doing a lot of stuff.
Okay.
We had mobile labs to service the eye care in the war.
Mostly eyeglasses.
Yeah, it was mostly
Most of-
eyeglasses, lenses, and like I said, goggles.
But we got into, in 1935, instrumentation, microscopes, other things, so we were in that as well. All right, I wanted to stop here because this is the infamous tunnel. Now, there's another tunnel system talked about that went under the smaller tunnel that went under where the statue was over to George Wells's house. But the tunnel I know, and I've walked through many times, is this one. Now, there was even manufacturing right in that when they ran out of space, but before they knocked it down, it went all the way over to the brick complex. It goes underneath here, underneath the corner of that building, down into the parking lot, underneath that small building, and underneath the cement building, over to the power plant. What that was a place you could walk through in the rain, but also steam and electricity. And the tube system where there were pneumatic tubes went through that. So this is the tunnel. There's a walk bridge that closed after somebody drove a forklift off it.
Walk bridge. Work.
Yeah, yes.
Right.
Okay. So if I was a typical worker coming to work here, where would I park my car? Like, tell me.
Well, you would park your car. There were a number of lots. One of them was right there. One of them was way down. We're going to walk by there. Here, parking spaces were critical. Many walked to work. You parked where you could, but it was an influx of cars, that's for sure.
Was it a 24-hour operation?
Yes, many, at one time it was. In fact, my father ran the Aolite plastic casting division. He started the CR39, and it was there, I remember, 24 hours, you kept it going, 24 hours. So let's walk down here. The building you're coming up to was the R&D building. I called it Building 17, but they renamed it Building 40. But this building was where fiber optics was developed, but also Todd A.O. Now Todd A.O., if you come to the museum, you'll see, but the first movie was Oklahoma. And there's a very famous picture that anybody that knows, Life magazine came and took a picture of Oscar Hammerstein and Mike Todd, who was Elizabeth Taylor's husband, Todd of Todd A.O., walking out that front door, and it's very famous. But
What are they doing here?
because Southbridge developed the Todd A.O. system, you'll still see the name today, but what that was a widescreen, curved screen. 2 months after the flood, in New York City, the movie Oklahoma premiered. Don't ask me how they did it. But it was a groundbreaking process to compete with television. They thought television was going to kill the movies. Clint Eastwood, I don't know, he wasn't in it, but you had Rod Steiger, you had, it was a great movie. So I worked in this building for many years. Toward the end, you had molded plastics here, R&D. To me, this is one building I hope, there are many buildings like that that got restored. I see this as a prime restoration example. The problem is, I think there's some asbestos they have to deal with.
Was that circular window up here meant to be like a clock tower, or is it?
That's where the logo for AO was originally. There are only 2 logos left, I'll show you later. Now this was my father's parking space, so but I worked most of my career in this building. Let's come over in the shade so you can look at it for a minute. By the way, Art mentioned this building. There's an identical building that AO had in Brattleboro, Vermont. If you get off the 3rd exit north in Brattleboro, there's a rotary. If you drive around the rotary and just up a ways, there's a steak restaurant, and across the street is that building. Same one. So this is where I spent most of my career. I shut this building down. It was depressing in 2006. My coworker and I, who still works with me, she's the other, Janine McElroy, we recycled 13 tons of paper. There was a laboratory on the 4th floor. That's where I started. My father's office was on the corner on the 2nd floor, and my father-in-law worked in fused bifocals around the corner, so it was a family affair. This building was built in 1910, and it's the largest cement structure in the United States at the time. Now, it was the lens plant. Now, the Wells sons were arguing about where to build a lens plant, and one of them jokingly said, well, let's build it in the marsh across the river, and that's what they did. This was a marshy area, and they filled it in. So that's 1910. This I hope something happens with, but I don't know. It's been empty for 10 years, and I'd love to see it saved, but it's a very difficult building to heat. And now on the 1st floor, glass executive bifocals were there from 1952 to 2006. It's the line bifocal that Ben Franklin invented. We were the only ones to make it. And if you come to the museum, you'll see the letter saying that President Kennedy ordered 3 pair. We got the order the day he was shot. So that always gets me. But this was our longest running production of any lens.
I used to hear the term Lensdale. Is that what they're talking about?
This was 2L Lensdale. Lensdale was a term. The original lens plant was the brick one across the way, but in 1910 they built this building. So let's walk the scenic route in front. It's a picturesque.
A lot of final glass lens polishing, and also a lot of edging of lenses.
Yeah, they did isoconic, very unique lens for people that have magnification differences. Very specialized lens making. Now I put that Zeiss logo because I work for Zeiss. They once were the competitor of AO, but now they bought American Optical Lens and sponsor the museum. So what you see here is what was called in 1935 the Avenue of Lenses. And I want to point this out. It's a beautiful spot over there. This in the morning is quite pretty, but does anybody know what those poles are? Anyone gather a guess? See those poles sticking out of the... What they are is the power plant, still in operation, would generate water that's warm. So they would spray it out into the pond to cool it off. And I would like them to restore that. I think I'm with the Southbridge Partnership, and I envision that in the future we may do things on this campus if we can work it out. But this is a great place to have people utilize more than it is. So anyhow, but this is the Avenue of Lenses.
What are those bars sticking out?
That's what I just said.
I missed it. I couldn't hear.
Oh, sorry. What they are is to spray the warm water from the power plant to cool it so that when it goes back into the pond it's not warm. And to aerate it, I guess, too.
Now they're talking about
Fixed up on the side of the building, sort of, is there?
All right, this building used to be glass frontage. And in the 50s, I think they thought it would be better insulated, and they put this fiberglass, whatever it is. It's still a very drafty building and tough to heat.
Can you see through it?
No,
No.
you can't. You get light, but you don't get anything more.
Yeah.
So this building I know the best. I spent my career on it. We used to be on the roof and do testing even on the roof.
How many people work there?
5,500 people in Southbridge. 13,000 around the world. And what happened, people always ask what happened. It's very complicated. But basically, any profitable business that was making money got sold. So without getting into I can tell you privately about details of it. From the first downsizing was they stopped making glass and sold the platinum for several $1 million. And that was 1979. The 80s, contact lens, shot fiber optics, anything, so it no longer had the AO name, and then got sold off. But I will say one thing, and come to the museum to see it. Alan McKinley, who is my treasurer, owns AO Eyewear. It's the sunglass that's been made since 1957. He brought his manufacturing back from China to Southbridge 3 years ago, and nobody knows that, but it's wonderful. He can't keep up with his business. It's doing great on Ashland Avenue. It's not, you know, I don't know, maybe 40 people in his employees, but still. So that's the one AO name that's left. So. Seeing this reminds me, hey, all right, you probably remember this too. Seeing this picnic table reminds me of a story. When Warner Lambert bought American Optical in 1967, and they wanted to unload it in 1982. When they went to unload it, and they sold it for a song for like $30 million, and the next business was sold for 110. They took all the picnic tables, said this should not look like a campus, it should look like everyone's working. They took all the picnic tables away. Now this was a campus, it was a learning campus, and when I went to my first standards meeting, I met with people from other businesses. 5 of the 7 people that were on my committee were all former AO employees. They all AO trained the world in optics. So, but I had to chuckle. We had no picnic tables for a while until they sold the business. If you come over here now, by the way, fire alarm, 2 alarms go off still. I think this is still active, but for many years the fire alarm on Main Street would go off. That's the other alarms. You'd hear 2 blasts, if anyone from town would remember. I'm not sure if that still goes off, but that was the other blast.
When did that go off?
Whenever there was a fire, it would blast so many blasts. Or at 6 o'clock at night, they would also blast. I can't remember now if that one is active. The fire department through the 90s, we had our own fire department, police department, medical department. This was a city unto itself, power generation, so everything. In fact, they used to carry guns around because they'd hand out cash. And there's a story of the men, although it wasn't just men working here, women worked throughout the factory. But they would go to the front window of the main plant and throw the money out, go shopping now, get the groceries. So. I'll let you stand in there so I can stand back, but so first of all, this walkway was built in 1956. The flood washed everything away and they rebuilt this. I have pictures my father took of them building that, but all that makes this dam, believe it or not, is a series of metal poles with wood. That's the dam, and it creates the pond. Now, a couple weeks ago, some of you may have noticed it was very low, and I'm not quite sure why, because behind the dam it wasn't very high, so I don't know. But they control the water level by the dam. This powerhouse literally almost washed away in the flood. The whole side was underneath the whole, there was about a 20-foot section that was totally washed away underneath it, maybe 30 feet. And this building was almost lost. But these were both built in 1910. So take a look there. And there's a nice view over here. Oftentimes, there's a lot of wildlife here. I remember seeing a lot of turtles sunning themselves here, and geese, deer, and you know. This building is Casedale, and you may have read, I don't know the details yet, but you may have read that they're going to put housing here. Believe it or not, this building has been empty 30 years. Gateway Players used to use it. Center of Hope did use a portion of it at one time. But, oh, it's the next building down. Okay, they did Rouge and stuff here. The next building down, you're right. Wait a minute, say.
This building here is built on an island.
I'd forgotten that one. Yes, you're right.
This is the natural side of the river, and when you get on the other side, you're going to see there's a man-made side of the river. Because this was the building where all the glass lens blanks first got their initial polishing. That was the dirtiest area within AO. And back in the days, they needed a lot of water, a lot of fluid to polish with and to run off all that rouge. So a lot of that sediment went back out into the river, and there's a settling area up in the back where they would settle out all the rouge and all the contaminants before the water processed down.
They actually clarified the place.
Oh, one other comment about this building was the only building that they could put up a full screen for Todd AO and project it to test out the movie. So there was a movie screen in there in 1955 to test the movie. Now, that building used to, some of you, if you're old enough, remember there was a claw in that building. It was a ventilation, it looked like this. And they made glass in that building. When they shut it down, I have the last glass made, but when they shut it down, they sold off several $1 million worth of platinum because that lined the furnace. And then all the glass solidified, so you may have seen some glass chunks around. I know like Starlight has a whole bunch of glass chunks. They used to be in my father's yacht, but the nightclub, he's got them displayed. I've got them at the museum, but they're glass, beautiful chunks of glass. But we stopped in 1979. Actually, I guess you can peek in. I believe the article mentioned that they were going to do some improvements to this building as far as power generation, but I don't know the details. Notice again the conveyor systems between buildings. I'm not quite sure why they'd need it to the power plant, but maybe you could walk that, I don't know. Hey, Art.
Yes?
I can't figure out why would they have had a connector to the power plant? That's one thing did you ever walk into that?
No, years ago there used to be the oil tanks that were up there. I think that's where the feed lines came across.
Oh, okay. Oh. That's where the oil tanks were. Okay, he answered that question.
Like a gravity feed.
Gravity feed coming down.
Wow. First of all, this building, my first job working in the lab was to come down to this building and write up the procedure that Wes Reed, a good friend, but also a chief scientist, how you measure the index of refraction of glass, and that's a specialized test that I wrote up the procedure for. Interestingly enough, we're just talking about that. China's bringing up that very topic at the ISO meetings we were at, so I knew a little bit about measuring index. This was glass research. This was the glass research building, glass plant. Because at the time, until the late 50s, early 60s, glass was the material. 1971 was a watershed year, changing it to plastic. President Nixon signed a law that every lens worn in the United States has to be capable of meeting a drop ball test, which I'll show you if you come to the museum. It's a 5/8" steel ball dropped from this height onto your lens. So every lens you're wearing since that time has been capable of meeting that. Every glass lens must be tested. Every plastic lens doesn't. Every batch does. So that really precipitated the switch over to plastic. So that was the beginning of the end with the glass plant.
So it's the idea that the glasses wouldn't break and shatter into your eye.
Because of the Vietnam War, they were seeing a lot of eye injuries. Turns out we're the only country that has it. The debate's still open whether it really matters, because you're safe wearing relatively safe wearing any lenses. You're better off than not. But certainly you're safer wearing U.S. glasses than any other glass. But then, if you're doing like wood chipping or drilling, you shouldn't just be you should be wearing safety glasses, and that's Art's primary expertise. Although I'm on the safety committee for the U.S. as well. But so impact testing is uniquely American, and it's never going away. It's a regulation. Once you got it, you can't, because lawyers would sue the pants off you. You mean to say you're wearing lenses that are not safe? So, you know. Anyhow, any questions?
What's the, in its heyday, what was the percentage made, percentage of eyewear made by AO?
Oh God, percentage. We were the largest, and I would say more than half. Now Zeiss, who is the sponsor of the museum and my employer now, AO wasn't making lenses in bulk. They were buying from Zeiss Germany until 1884, when Congress put a tariff on Zeiss product. So interestingly enough, at that point there was a fireworks celebration in the town common to say we're going to get into the lens business. So then we did, and in spades we were the #1 until really we had the most successful progressive lens design series. I worked on them all and designed one of them, but Dr. John Winthrop, I don't think you can still beat that. And AO, Dr. Estelle Glancy, which you'll learn about if you come to the museum, invented for the US, she has the patent for the progressive lens in 1924. So AO was involved in lens design, manufacturing, frames, instruments, whatever. Chairs. Office design. We used to design offices, you know. Not to get into details, but that's a toxic landfill from the American Optical. And right behind the thing, I used to do outdoor lens testing, where we actually would put lenses on a rack and leave them in the sun for weeks, and then watch what happened to the material and coating. And we did that there for a number of years. This was the world site for outdoor testing for Solar, which was the optical company that bought AO prior to Zeiss.
Is that a Superfund site over there?
I don't know Superfund, but there was contamination. I don't think it's, because AO had a lot of contamination. As he mentioned, rouge used to just go in the river. I mean, it was a different time. Now you can't even disturb the dirt by the river, but back then it was a different time. So there is some, I don't know the level, but there is some it's a DEP site.
Wasn't this going to be a movie theater or something like a long time ago?
When one of the town managers was in political trouble, he overpromised and said that there was going to be a movie theater here. He also said that the museum was going on Main Street, which it would be nice, but it never was really planned. So, yeah, there was talk. I wish it had happened in a way, but this site still has potential, and I'm thrilled to see, we'll see the building shortly, is going to be renovated versus torn down.
What's the acreage?
I've forgotten the exact, I think it's 45. but I've forgotten the exact number. I should know. I'm not good at numbers.
How many total buildings in the complex?
Number question, of course.
They're numbered, well, I'd say 15 to there are small buildings, but the larger types, I'll count them before you're done. I'll count them.
Were the hazardous materials gathered and dumped there, and did they clay line it and all that, or was it just they picked the site through crap there?
I think because this was downstream, I'm not quite sure, but I do know that's, I don't think it's serious, but you wouldn't want to build a building on it or something, that's all. So it's kind of a reserved site. Because there were, let's face it, you make some of the stuff we made. I used to test glass for radioactivity because there was a time where glass was radioactive. And I remember testing. And then in 1977, they really were, wait a minute, we shouldn't be selling radioactive glass. But I had a watch that was radioactive, and I put it in, the dials. I think now, hopefully I didn't get cancer from it, but it's a different time.
Still look at it at night.
Yeah, say, isn't that cool? Isn't that cool? Well, look at all right, couple things. I do want to point out, I always think of it as Notre Dame, but it's St. John or whatever we call it today. But the church, for those that are not from around here, the church up on the hill was built in 1916 of all unused tombstones from the Spanish-American War. They didn't have enough people die, so the father got a deal from Vermont on the quarry. And legend has it that a few of the stones even had engravings in them. But that's a beautiful building. And there's a lot of history in town. Steve Brady is a much better historian. He's done walks, if you've done one with him. He knows the town inside and out. But there's also an archway by Oak Ridge Cemetery that was built. A guy said it's very narrow, and if you've ever noticed the Oak Ridge Cemetery, it was built by a guy who lived next door. He said, I will donate, pay for, and construct an archway, Southbridge, do you want it? He did, but it was too narrow for the carts to go through. So they have to now go around to the other. So he achieved what he wanted, is to prevent the traffic from going near his house. I love that story. But there are many, I think the architecture outside of the fire we have beautiful architecture in town. And the first department store was the Edwards building in the United States.
There's a brook or a river that runs underneath some of the
Nuisance
buildings.
Brook runs underneath Main
what's
Street.
the name of it?
Nuisance Brook.
Nuisance.
Because it was a nuisance to the town.
Oh, jeez.
Len's warehouse.
Glass lens.
That was the warehouse before the big warehouse, in other words. Yeah, this is what he meant, that this is an island. And the building that we're going to walk up to is the one that they plan on renovating for housing. And on the back side of it is wooden. I don't know, it's not the original wood, but this was built in 1895. And it's still wood siding. Yeah, so I want to get those if I can, but the last two remaining AO logos on campus are right up on, there may be three on that tower. And since they're going to renovate, maybe they'll do something with it, but I'd love those. I have one like that was on the cement building at the museum, but I don't know, I think it's worth a walk down here. Look, of all lens blanks scattered all over that parking lot, because when the flood happened, it washed everything from the warehouse out. In 2 days after the flood, we started shipping product again, which is amazing because they almost shut the whole complex down. But think of it. And you didn't know for 2 weeks, some people didn't know where their relatives were because there was no communication. So, I mean, now what's happening in Puerto Rico is worse, but back then, no communication at all. And a friend told me that there's a gas station next to Southbridge News at the time. They jury-rigged a pump with a lawnmower to pump the gas, but then they realized there was no place you could drive. because everything was washed out. So see, there's the last wood that I am aware of, wooden siding. This is a canal. It's jogging my memory that when they closed Brattleboro in '82, I remember coming here and setting up the safety operation in this building. So Brattleboro, as they started to close branches, they closed Frederick, Maryland Frame Plant in '82. And it started to shrink. And then they sold other businesses. But yeah, one way or another, I think both Art and I worked in many of these buildings. So before we leave, there's kind of a view with the wooden. I don't know why everything is bricked except one section is wood. Maybe that's the original building. That's what they did with the main plant. They built brick around the wooden center building.
Is this the one you're converting?
Yes, this is the one. Which blows my mind because this has basically been empty for decades.
You had your own carpenter shop too.
Yeah, the carpenter shop was also the print shop at one point.
I think it's up next to the warehouse.
Because at one point,
The shop is way on the other side there.
wasn't it where 5 is now? Wasn't that print shop and also carpenter shop?
Across the bridge, take a left. That was the carpenter shop.
Because this says the print shop was, but
Where that little walk-through gate is. That's
okay.
what it's building. That was the carpenter shop. It's owned by Schott right now.
Oh, okay. Well, come along. Now, I think these grounds still are quite beautiful. The one grievance I do have, which I'll go on record, is they've let the fence go, and I think that's a shame. But that fence is the original fence that I remember. It was there in 1955. I think it was there in the 30s. And you'll see areas where cars have hit it and taken sections down, but it's still the original fence. Many of the systems, like the dioptric power system, was developed and established in the turn of the 20th century. And we developed the lensometer, which I'm giving a course on in a couple of weeks, but it's the instrument used to measure eyeglass power. We did a lot in the optical area of design and really set the stage for higher tech lenses. Now, Zeiss recently in 1999 invented what they call freeform, which is a revolutionary way of cutting the lens totally by machine. Most of the lenses you'd be wearing were formed by a mold, but now they can cut very accurately any surface with a machine, both sides, which means they can cut the product to your exact specification. So it's another world, but still, many of the lens designs and processes are still, and instruments like the lensometer are still used today. Now this right here was the guard shack. Notice, so you'd drive up and you'd have to sign out. There was parking across the street. They would close it probably on off hours. I can't imagine. I don't know what they did when 5,500 people were driving out, but on the side is a whole park area. The town is also talking about making that a public park, and you know they need money to do it. But I wouldn't be surprised if this became. You know, I'd like to see events here or a water fire or something. You know, we could do things with. Yeah, I know. It's owned primarily by Franklin Realty, but then each business, some of them were sold privately. So, but Franklin Realty oversees the operation of and the maintenance of the grounds.
Okay, but the basic empty buildings are owned by Franklin?
Unless they sold them to somebody else speculatively, I don't know. I used to be able to walk through there. It's a nice walk. You could walk around and walk in here. Well, he's asking why why did things begin to be sold off? And it's complicated, but Warner Lambert, Pfizer, expected pharmaceutical profit levels of 30% or whatever. You make 10% or whatever the number was here. They weren't happy with the profits. So when they sold it, they dumped it for $30 million, which was a song then. And just after that, it was speculative that, plus you had foreign competition. I mean, talk about now, I went and I helped move the operation in the 80s to Mexico. So cheaper labor. Frederick was cheaper labor than Southbridge, and that was in the 50s. And I'm told the story, how they settled on that place. It was near an airport. The guy flew in, walked to the first building and said that's where the AO plant will be. So cheap labor, foreign competition, lack of profitability to expectation, stockholders, people running it that didn't know what the hell they were doing. That's my own feeling. But George Wells was an apprentice and he became president. He worked his way up. He knew the whole business. That's how you make a company great. Couple things. First of all, you can walk down here. This may be an area that's a public park, but you still can walk through it now. And you could even walk behind the fence and down that way if you're interested. You won't get arrested. But so over there where it says Food Mart and the triple-decker houses behind, the peaked houses behind, that's where the factory was in 1839.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.